does not speak for us. What does that mean?
My name's Jean, and he's behind a lot of the initiatives, Race to the Top, a lot of the different educational pushes for corporatizing, privatizing, closing down schools, opening up charter schools. He's behind a lot of that movement, that corporatist movement of education, and we do not feel that as educational researchers here at AERA that he stands for us. We don't feel that the corporate movement that seems to be happening more in AERA, that it stands for what is best for our kids in our public schools, especially our kids in marginalized communities. It does not stand for our teachers, and we feel that it is really deprofessionalizing the career of being a teacher, and we stand against that.
Do you think Arnie Duncan has been scapegoating teachers for the education crisis in the United States?
We do feel that it's not just Arnie Duncan, it's part of a very large neoliberal movement that scapegoats teachers and blames them for what they consider to be, low achievement scores that are being stacked, low test scores that are being stacked against students, especially students that are not of the dominant white culture. It usually happens that a lot of students have different cultures that do not align with what is being pushed in the culture of power, and we really feel that we're pushing for social justice in education, which means to stop this madness towards testing, towards achievement in terms of testing only, and we feel very strongly against that kind of issue.
Where are you from?
I'm in North Carolina right now.
So that's a union-free state. Are teachers' unions under attack in North Carolina?
Yes, there are no teachers' unions in North Carolina. It is a right-to-work state, and so teachers can be fired at the drop of the hat for no reason whatsoever. And in fact, one of the districts very near to where my school is turning into an all-charter school district, and they're closing down all public funding and turning it into all charter schools, and we are very much against that.
What does that mean to the children of North Carolina?
Well, it means that they're going to get less support, especially students of special needs will get a lot less support. It means that a lot of private corporations are going to be making money off the backs of our students with increased testing, increased high-stakes testing that's going to cause a lot of hurt and a lot of trouble for a lot of our students, especially our students in poverty. And it's going to cause a lot of teachers to do nothing but teach to the test for the sake of their jobs, and it's not right.
I'm here to resist the corporatization of public education.
And what does that mean, corporatization of public education?
Okay.
Where are you from?
From Japan, actually. And I'm a doctoral student at Teachers College, and there has been a multi-layered attack on public education. It's happening in kindergarten level, elementary school level, secondary school level, higher education level, and also educational research level. And so what's happening now is an ideological cleansing by corporate forces, and AERA is implicitly supporting that by its silence.
And Arnie Duncan, who does he represent? Is he the head of the U.S. Department of Education? 1%.
He's representing 1%.
So you're saying that they're doing this for more profit-making in corporations like Pearson and other companies that do testing?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, so we just came up with a new logo. Pearson has a catchphrase called Pearson Always Learning. We cross out L, Pearson Always Earning.
Do you teach?
I do. I was a former public school teacher in Japan.
And what's going on in Japan? Is there a problem of privatization as well there?
Japan has a colonized mentality, so what happens in the U.S. will ultimately come down to Japan.
So you think the United States is pushing to have privatization in Japan?
Oh yeah, totally. It's really destroying the culture.
What about repression of teachers in Japan with the singing of the national anthem? Is there repression against teachers in Japan?
Yeah, but what's happening is, the dumbing down on the teachers and, using teachers as a scapegoat. And so what I see happening is the declining social status of teachers. But if you think about it, you cannot learn anything unless you respect the teacher. And so I think that's the core problem.
Okay.
Introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Edwin Mayorga. I'm a doctoral student from the City University of New York.
And what brings you here today?
Well, I'm a researcher and an educator, and I wanted to let not only Arnie Duncan but my association know that I refuse to be privatized, and I refuse to allow my students to be just a race and a number, as opposed to being human beings.
And what's happening in New York City as far as what Arnie Duncan is doing?
Well, I think Arnie Duncan is just the tip of an iceberg that represents really what's happening in all of our cities with regards to education. It's under attack. We're being privatized. Schools are being closed. The charter school expansion is tremendous, and so it's really displacing all of the hopes and dreams of young people in their communities, particularly young poor people and people of color.
Well, Pearson company says that they're helping out, learning about the students and the psychology of the students. They're helping out education. You have a different thought?
Well, my take is that they're really reducing students to numbers and to big data, and that's not a human being. So they're really making us into robots.
It's commodification of education. Do you think that's part of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything is about profit and not about people really developing as human beings.
The national unions, AFT and NEA, why haven't they launched any national campaign against privatization and charters?
I mean, I really think it's an issue of political will and really moving unions to have that kind of analysis around what's going on, and I think they're just kind of sitting on their laurels and allowing their power to be taken away from them. And I think privatization is really doing that. So,
you think it's because they don't want to fight Obama and the Democratic Party?
I mean, I think it's one of the big challenges because they end up, they're not going to side with rightist Republicans, so they're kind of sitting on this, and really they need to be, in my mind, the ones pushing the Democratic Party to actually represent social justice.
Do you think the Democratic Party ever will?
I'm hard-pressed to say that that's going to happen, but I think, if we can continue to push a progressive stance around, really the right to the city and the right to public needs, and really keeping the state accountable to that, I think we can keep pushing unions to try to do that, and the Democratic Party to do that. But I'm not going to put all my eggs in that basket.
Okay, thank you. Arnie Duncan does not speak for you.
He doesn't speak for me. He doesn't speak for
Who are you?
educators. I'm Kenya Wolf. I'm a preschool teacher, a mother, a graduate student, a researcher. He does not speak for me. He speaks for the company. He's a corporate mouthpiece. He's about profits. He's given up on teachers, but we aren't going to give up on our kids.
And why is that? He represents the U.S. government. Is this the position of the U.S. government?
Not profits.
I'm losing my voice. I've been out here. But no, clearly the U.S. government is basically a mouthpiece for corporations now. We need to get our democracy back. We need to be working for our kids in their best interest and not in the interest of profiteering and turning our schools into basic open markets for money makers.
Not profits. What? People. Not profits. What? People.
I'm Fran Huckabee.
Where are you from?
I'm from Texas.
What does that mean, people not profit?
That means that our students shouldn't be sold, that education shouldn't be sold, that we want education to be for the people and not the corporations.
And do you think the corporations are behind this privatization and charters?
They're definitely benefiting from it. They're definitely benefiting from it, and yes, they are, as are foundations and other private entities.
And what's happening in Texas with education?
We have 119 bills in the legislature right now, most of which will privatize public education. So vouchers, charter schools, all sorts of things like that.
So is that the end of public education in Texas?
I certainly hope not.
What about the unions? What's the unions' response in Texas to these attacks, these bills?
The unions are active and engaged in letting teachers and the community know about what's happening in terms of the legislation or the potential legislation. So they're there fighting along with the teachers and the communities.
Well, Governor Perry is for privatization, deregulation, and you just had a big explosion there.
Yes.
He wants to put, apparently, the privateers, he wants to put the corporations in charge of education. Is that his ideology?
Yes.
And who's going to benefit from that in Texas?
The
corporations will, some of the private charter schools will, and they'll get public funding in order to do so. Yeah, and unfortunately it means that some kids are going to get pushed out of schools if that happens. But we're hoping that it won't happen. People are organizing in Texas as well.
This idea of race to the top, you have to be in a lottery to get a good public education. Why are they putting that out?
I have no idea. Apparently gambling is a good idea when it comes to education. I don't know the logic behind it.
And how are teachers in Texas hurting today as a result of this? How are teachers in Texas hurting as a result of privatization of education?
Well, I think that the extra focus on test scores and the companies that are profiting from the tests that's definitely happening with the teachers and with the kids. Also, they're selling lots of books that aren't necessarily needed. The profession of teaching is being deprofessionalized as well, so educators are getting hit in terms of that, as well as students. We currently have a cap on charter schools, but some of the legislation is to make charter schools and vouchers sort of unlimited, which then just moves public funding into private entities and away from public schools. And if that happens, we could end up like Chicago or Wisconsin or New York. So I'm hoping that that's not the case in Texas.
So Arnie Duncan, what do you have to say to him today?
I think he needs to listen to the resistance. Not the
and do what?
I think he needs to listen to the resistance and rethink the policy completely. There was a group at the Department of Education just earlier this month, and there were some kids that went in and met with the Department of Education as well. A couple of months ago, there was another group at the Department for Justice. Arnie Duncan was present just for a little bit at that meeting. I think he and Obama and all of our legislators and elected officials and appointed officials need to listen to the resistance, because we are seeing the impact of the policies that the corporations are not going to tell them. Profits are going good for them, but there's a huge impact on communities, and people are being disenfranchised from public education.
Teacher?
I am a teacher.
Where do you teach?
I teach in Canada, actually, at McGill University.
And why are you here today?
I'm here to fight back against standardized testing and education that's not about learning.
And is there some problem in Canada as well? Threats of privatization and testing?
We don't have... Everything that happens here starts to leak north. So even though we're not quite in the same extreme situation, you can feel it starting to bubble and become more conservative and more focused for sure on test scores. So we also have standardized tests that happen throughout the year, and the focus is distracting from learning there as well, and it's growing.
And are teachers being scapegoated in Canada like they are in the United States for lack of education?
Teachers are always scapegoated, period.
Are you shocked about what's happened in the United States?
You know what? I didn't know until I came to the conference. I was actually at the Curriculum Studies conference, and we were learning from our colleagues just how severe it was and just how much of a handhold Pearson and Pearson Resources has on making money through education. I didn't realize that it was to such an extreme at all. So yeah, I've learned a lot since being here, and it's kind of scary.
So you're really afraid that this will start to happen in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you for sure it already is, but it's just that everything here is amplified. You know, like the NFL football is a lot bigger here, CFL football is small, and so it's just the sizes of our country are different. But
what do you mean stop the war on teaching?
I mean,
What's your name?
my name is Jubin Rahatza, and I'm a graduate student at Purdue University. We need to stop the de-intellectualization of teachers in the U.S. and actually respect what educators do in this country, and put our priorities where they are. Stop bombing countries with drones and put more money into education. If we do that, then we won't have all this supposed crises in education. So let's just give some respect to educators.
Why are teachers being scapegoated?
Why are they being scapegoated? Who are you with?
Labor Video Project.
What?
Labor Video Project.
Okay. Teachers are being scapegoated because this country chooses certain people to distract from the larger issues that are going on in this country. Inequities exist throughout this capitalist society. So why not pick on somebody that's already been de-intellectualized, somebody that's already been put down? It's easy to pick on people that have already been broken down. Teacher labor unions are actually nonsense in lots of places. I was a teacher for a couple years in Indiana, and our teacher unions are basically useless. I don't know really what they're there for. We had no rights, we could be fired at any time.
Are you surprised that the teacher unions haven't launched any education campaign nationally against privatization?
Teacher unions haven't? No, I'm not, because teacher unions were broken long ago, along with other labor unions in this country. So before I was born in '81, so all this stuff happened with Reagan and maybe even a little bit before that, but yeah.
What should be done to stop this attack on education?
We got a long way to go. We need to organize, and along the way we also need to learn or engage in what we're learning, which means touching out to one another again, creating communities again that existed in this country a long time ago, before I was born again, in the 50s and 60s, the golden era of U.S. labor. If we recreate that kind of stuff, we'll also learn ourselves along the way, as well as fight for human rights in all ways, such as education, healthcare, and these types of things.
You think that this is about profit, making profit for the...
Absolutely, unfortunately.
Who's doing it?
The corporations, unfortunately the government, is making sure that education is not about people and not about learning anymore. And
Where are you from?
New York City.
My name is Alejandro Carrion.
Where are you from?
New York City.
Why are you here today?
To protest Arnie Duncan coming to AERA, the privatization of schools, charter schools, just everything that's wrong with education today.
And what is going on in New York City with education?
A lot of closing of schools, mayoral control, charter schools taking over campuses, the pushing out of students. It's just not looking good in New York City.
You think it's racism? It seems like it's not wealthy white districts, it's mostly poor working class Latino black districts.
Yeah, I mean there's a hint of racism in there, there's a hint of classism in there as well. I think there's a lot of different things going on.
And you're opposed to mayoral control of schools?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because schools should be an entity of the public. It shouldn't be in the hands of just one person. Also, it shouldn't be in the hands of one person that wants to privatize the whole system.
And Klein and previous schools, Mayor Bloomberg, who do they represent as far as schools?
Say that again?
Bloomberg. Who does Bloomberg represent?
Bloomberg represents Bloomberg. Represents himself. I mean, he has his own agenda. He's going to push it no matter what.
I see. So, do you think it's benefiting or harming students in New York City?
It's harming students more than benefiting them. Yes.
And what's going to happen when Arnie speaks at this conference?
Hopefully a lot of outrage. Hopefully a lot of protesting. That's what I'm here for.
Arnie Duncan's got to go. Hey, hey.
What does this mean? Not my name.
Not in my name. There is no test scores in our name, please. I mean, education is more than that. So
I'm for dumping Arnie Duncan because education is a right, not a race.
He wants to take it away?
He wants to hand it over to the privatizers, to the corporations, to the testing manufacturers and the testing companies, and we want to reclaim public education for the public good.
And why is he doing this?
Well, you'd have to. There is a misguided tendency in this country that if you make kids compliant and test ready, then you can have a workforce that's going to be competitive. It's going to be neither competitive nor ultimately compliant, because when you hold people down, they eventually rise up.
And where are you from?
I'm from Oakland, California. I'm Trish Gorham. I'm the president of the Oakland Education Association.
Are the unions beginning to challenge testing and privatization of education?
They have all along. The unions have been against the over-testing of kids and the high-stakes testing. We're not against testing. We do it every day. We assess every day. But when you start putting high stakes on it, then you get skewed results everywhere. It doesn't even give you valid information.
What is your position on merit pay for teachers in deciding what their salary should be?
Well, what are you going to base that merit on? Whether I have 10 special ed students in my class or 10 gifted students in my class? How are you going to judge that? How are you going to give me merit pay?
Do you think there are financial conflicts of interest where you have board of directors members or school board members and other government officials who are actually voting on contracts for privatizers that they have a financial interest in?
Well, I don't know where that is entirely true. I'm sure it is true to some extent. I don't have the actual proof of it, except that that in Oakland, this past school board race, Go Public Schools, a private entity in Oakland, put out $200,000 in a school board race. $150,000 from corporate philanthropists and $50,000 from the Charter School Foundation. So follow the money.
And Michelle Rhee, she says she's for the students of America. What's the reality behind her campaign?
Michelle Rhee is for Michelle Rhee, and she's for the corporatizers, and they found somebody that could mouth their words and for somehow be accepted even through all her lies, and that's what she's about. She's about getting the money through her organization.
Where does she get her money and funding, Michelle Rhee?
I think she gets some Coke money. I don't know exactly.
The Walton Foundation, the Broad Foundation.
I mean, the usual suspects for sure. I don't have the whole list, but it's those people who all of a sudden, thought black and brown children didn't have anything to do with them, and they ignored them for decades. And all of a sudden, now they're all about inner city, urban children. And it's not about the kids, it's about the money. We just found out in Florida. Florida got a big land deal. Charter schools now got money to purchase the buildings, right? So they purchase the buildings that the schools are in, charge outrageous rents for them. It's about the money.
You think this is a financial scam on the public?
Absolutely, absolutely. A financial scam, and it is to keep the public undereducated. The elite, the powers, they educate their kids. They have all small classes. They have inquiry. They don't fill in bubbles every day.
And you think Labor Video Project, do you think that there's public money should be going to private schools in California, charter schools?
Charter schools are not private schools, even though they act like them. But no, public money should be going to public schools. It is part of the social contract of this nation that we provide at least a floor that for children and their education. It should be as rich as the richest person in this country. But when you start balkanizing the American education system, you are destroying the American education system. And Arne Duncan doesn't care.
Has he talked to the Oakland teachers and yourself and other teachers in Oakland about what's going on in Oakland with charter schools and public education?
We're very much aware. We have 30 of them in Oakland. So we're fighting right now. The county, even though Oakland sometimes denies charter schools, then the county says, oh yeah, put that charter school in Oakland. Or the state says, put that charter school in Oakland. So we don't have control of even our own, what's happening in our local school district.
Well, Sheila Jordan, who's the superintendent of instruction for Alameda County, is the union going to run people against these people who are supporting privatization of education?
We have 7 school board members. We are looking a little more locally, but we certainly would want to look to coalitions that are running candidates against the people that are sold out to corporations. I can't tell you right now that Sheila Jordan is necessarily one of them. I totally want to see how her board votes on the American Indian School coming up. The American Indian School who had a big scandal of mismanagement, millions of dollars in the hands of the person who ran that school. Oakland closed that school. The Alameda County better keep that school closed.
My name is Mika Lopez Cardoso. I'm from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I'm here today for a conference and I work on education in Bolivia. And I don't know, do you have a...
Well, I mean, Netherlands has a strong public education system, and teachers in the United States are being attacked, scapegoated for the education crisis. Why is this attack on public education taking place in the United States and other countries?
Why the attack is taking place? I think it's part of a neoliberal kind of political environment that doesn't respect or give the status to teachers that they actually deserve. So I'm more familiar with the context of Bolivia or Indonesia, for instance, where I do research, and you see there as well that teachers are often blamed for all of the errors in the education system, but they're not getting the support, not the right salaries, not the welfare systems that they actually should get for their very important job.
And in Netherlands, is there an attack on public education in the Netherlands and a push for testing and more privatization?
There is definitely also in the Netherlands a move towards more kind of standardized testing and budget cuts because of the economic crisis in the European context are also affecting the education system, yes.
And what is the situation in Bolivia? There was a struggle against privatization of water. Is there a struggle there against privatization of education?
Yes, the privatization of education is being actually limited. The case of Bolivia is quite exceptional in the sense that the government there is not supporting private education, so they're really trying to fund public education. So it's an exceptional case, and in that sense, perhaps a partly promising case as well.
Do you think this is an international issue, the defense of public education?
Is it an international? It's definitely an international issue. Yes, I think public education should be supported, and there should be a lot of kind of critique and historical and grounded analysis also on the current privatization of education.
I'm Danny Halford, City College of San Francisco. I want to mention I lived in Germany for 26 years, and when I tell them what's happening here in public education, they can't believe it. In Germany, public education is completely supported. Almost everybody goes to public education, including politicians' children and millionaires' children, so of course everybody supports public education. And this idea of race to the top is ridiculous. In a race, there's one winner and everybody else loses. This is not a concept for public education, not for any kind of not for any kind of education. Yeah, so education is not a race. Education is a right. It's not a privilege. It's for everybody.
And City College is now under attack, cutbacks, yet San Francisco is one of the richest cities in the world. Do you find that a contradiction?
Yeah, of course it is. It's a question of priorities. You know that California is #1 in the nation per capita in prison spending, and in K through 12 education spending we are 49th out of 50, and for higher education we're in last place. And of course there's all the untaxed money. There's the oil industry, which pays no tax. There are a lot of other corporations that pay no tax. Millionaires and billionaires don't pay their fair share. So there's plenty of money out there. It's just a question of priorities.
Why are the unions supporting a democratic state, a democratic governor, democratic mayors, democratic legislature? They could change the rules. They have 2/3 control. Why aren't the unions making a push to say, who are these people representing?
That I can't say. You would have to ask the union, but I'm really disgusted with our Democratic representatives. I mean, we don't expect anything from Republicans, but you know, when the Democrats start acting like Republicans, then what good is it? What good is our whole political system?
You think it should be a Labor Party, a party for working people?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I mean, look at Nancy Pelosi. She's supposed to represent San Francisco. Her aides have refused even to meet with us about how she could help City College. I mean, they won't even talk to us. And she represents San Francisco. I say throw her out.
Yongshan Hong Yongshan. I come from Taiwan, Taipei. But I try to again to explain the purpose of why I am in AERA. Because I agree with the theme, poverty and education. Education has more powerful to solve many questions. But I think American, you have your many problems. And teachers are professional workers. We should respect teachers, give more freedom to teachers, to support them to do job well. So that's from Taiwan experience. Thank you.
Are the teachers' unions under attack in Taiwan?
Yes, we have a teacher unions. Just these years, but not the now. It's more get stronger. But the students' learning right is prior to teaching right.
Okay, thank you. What's your?
嗨，大家好，我是洪永善，我在美国旧金山参加 AERA 2013的年会，在这边很开心，然后学到很多。总之 ，enjoy.
And privatization of Taiwan, is that an issue in Taiwan? Education privatization?
对，在台湾的教育呢，它是非常的蓬勃的发展，所以呢，我这次来呢，不只是发表，而且呢，也跟大家呢一起学习。
My name is Brent Edwards. I just graduated from the University of Maryland, PhD Education Policy. It concerns me because what I see is the replication at the national level, or across the nation rather, of reforms that have failed in Chicago, charter schools being primary among them. So that and other initiatives like Teach for America are being kind of pushed, emphasized, encouraged, and I'm not for that.
And what has it cost in the education system? Teach for America, for example.
Yeah, well, Teach for America, and this is someone who's speaking who actually did Teach for America and who left. The training, mainly, the teachers don't get enough training. You don't enter the schools with the right kind of support. So I think it's a short-term measure. I don't think it's a long-term solution. But as far as charter schools go, my main concern is issues around equity. It's very racist the way, if you look across states between Detroit, Chicago, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, the way that charter schools are happening, you see schools closings being replaced with charter schools primarily in minority disadvantaged communities. And so I think it has implications for for race and the provision of quality public services along those lines. And so I think we need to take a more critical look at how charter schools are operating and with what kinds of implications.
So why is Obama pushing this if it's radically affecting education in the black community, Latino community, poor communities?
I can't answer that question. I mean, I think that some of these, perhaps a tentative response would speak to the marketing and the popularity of these reforms, and perhaps some of the interests, the lobby groups that push these ideas despite their negative consequences.
I am Sharon Higgins, and I am an Oakland resident who sent children to Oakland Unified Schools for 18 years.
And what do you think about Arnie Duncan?
I am just really pissed at Arnie Duncan. I'm pissed at Obama. They are so misguided with their educational reform movement. I can't tell you. You know, this is not what the schools need. Everything they're implementing is not what the schools need.
And what's going on in Oakland? Is it charter crisis?
Oakland is, as many urban districts, has been the site of implementing charter schools and closing down public schools and creating an incredible amount of divisiveness. Some of the charter schools are corrupt. There's one, the American Indian Public Charter School, is very highly touted, and it's in big trouble right now. Can't get its board together. Has been ruled by a director who's siphoned money for himself and his wife off the board, and that's just one example of the abuses that the charter school operators are perpetrating in my town.
So, are you saying that this is a systemic problem in charters of corruption and people siphoning money off?
I think that there's a really high frequency of it. I also operate a blog called Charter School Scandals, and for the last 3 years I've been keeping an eye on all the news stories that come in about charter schools, and there's an incredible amount of abuse going on. The idea with charter schools is to have these schools be publicly funded but privately managed, and the private management has a lot to be desired sometimes.
And what does Arnie Duncan have to do with this?
Arnie Duncan is in favor of charter schools. Arnie Duncan has a set of staff members that he brought in with him, and we have to remember that President Obama brought Arnie Duncan in, and Arnie Duncan is his basketball buddy from long time back. And so Arnie Duncan is just promoting this whole agenda with the charter school expansion. Happy to give it lots and lots of money for their facilities and everything.
So what's happening with public schools in Oakland?
We're really struggling over there. I think what has happened is that there's been a systematic withdrawal and kind of starvation of the schools. We've got beautiful library rooms with no money to staff librarians. We've got kids who are being forced to take 2 periods of math, for instance, and no science or no PE. They've got to double up on their No Child Left Behind subjects, you see. They don't take electives. People are just incredibly, the kids are being deprived. And this is just an onslaught about privatization that's come on. We've felt it. Philadelphia, Chicago, every large city you can name has felt it. But there's some recent pushback, which is excellent.
And what about this group, Parents for America? How is it formed, or what is it doing?
Parents Across America is a group that I helped found. I'm not on the official board right now, but we connected. We're parents who connected with each other online, basically. Each of us in our own communities, seeing what was going on in our towns, and started reaching out to each other. And then a few years ago, we had a meeting where we actually got to finally meet each other and form this organization. And we put out some great position papers. And in fact, one of the Parents Across America leaders, Rita Solnay, was just instrumental in preventing the second attempt for a parent trigger bill to be passed in Florida, and they just succeeded today of not getting it passed for the second time.
And what's the idea of the trigger bill? What is that, trigger bill?
Trigger bill is one of these inventions by one of these well-funded organizations funded by people like Walton, Broad, Gates, that is trying to go around, there's a group called the Parent Revolution that really started it. It was also started by the current director of Democrats for Education Reform in California, who is no longer in office. It was, what's her name? Gloria Romero, yeah. Who also, her campaigns were funded by the same moneyed corporate reform set of billionaires. At any rate, this law, which is also being pushed by ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is tied to all these Tea Party groups, and what they do is they try and get these bills passed that say that parents can vote to turn their schools into charters. So that means that one group of parents at one school, if they can be convinced to do so, and the convincing them to do this is also crooked, because sometimes they sign petitions and they say, no, we didn't understand the petitions. A lot of these people aren't native English speakers. They're signing things they don't fully understand. And so we have this one sort of cohort of parents that can make for 1 year, make a permanent change in the school and turn it over to private managers, same private managers we talked to earlier about that are running this charter school with public money. It's not right.
What's the effect on public education in the United States as a result of this testing and privatization of education?
Well, certainly things aren't getting any better. I don't think the national test scores prove out that any of these heavy-handed reforms have done any good. And children are being deprived of the wealth of subjects. Teachers, I can tell you this, that teachers and principals are having terrible morale problems in these districts where they have this high-stakes testing, where their livelihood depends on it, on how well they test scores they can have their students produce. Also, what's coming out now is the rampant cheating that goes on as people attempt to keep their jobs and get their bonuses that they're given based on their test scores of their students' result. I mean, this is the whole motivation. Everything about this is so misguided. I can't tell you. And then one of my particular pet peeves is how we never address people like Arnie Duncan, President Obama, really don't address the incredibly high child poverty rate in this country. We are second to Mexico of the advanced nations. The other thing we don't ever address is the incredibly high incarceration rate that a lot of these kids are coming from families that have been disturbed by this by our high. We are the country with the highest incarceration rate in the world. Russia's underneath us, and this we don't ever talk about this. So there are lots of things and these things affect children. So these are things that we need to be discussing.
Do you think Arnie Duncan is a scam artist?
A scam artist? No, I think he is. I don't know. He has a bachelor's degree in sociology. His claim to fame for working in urban schools is that he used to help his mother tutor in an inner-city tutoring center that he had. After he finished Harvard with his bachelor's degree, he went to play basketball in Australia. And then at the end of that, he came back and started working for a friend who gave him a job at AERA Capital Management, I forget the name of the nonprofit that AERA Capital Management in Chicago set up, but Arnie Duncan was running it. It had to do with education. And then after that, Arnie Duncan was tapped to work in Chicago public schools, and then from there, after Paul Vallis left, then he got promoted to be the CEO of Chicago public schools. And I have no idea, other than just what's it called, corruption, cronyism. Yeah, he is in the position of incredible power that he's in, and it's just, that's not right either.
And Michelle Rhee, who is Michelle Rhee?
Michelle Rhee is the former chancellor of the Washington Public School District. She is one of these Teach for America teachers who went on to make create a teacher training program, although her role in that is questionable. And then she was eventually tapped to to be the chancellor of the DC Public Schools. She also is completely tied to people like Eli Broad, and I think, he's the one that recommended her, and Joe Klein actually recommended her to work in DC Public Schools, and these people are all in bed together with the same thing. So anyway, she lost her position after Adrian Fenty was voted out because he was the mayor of Washington, D.C., and people were so unhappy with what Rhee was doing. That was one of the reasons he didn't get reelected. So within a few months after that, she went on to form an organization called Student First, which has been going around the country working with people like ALEC and Tea Party governors like Scott of Florida and others, to implement all these corporate education reform, privatization measures of our public schools. And I just read today she got, I think, like $9 million from the Walton Family Foundation. So this is all the same thing, the Walmart family. I think the 6 members of the Walton family own, I believe it's like at least 40% or maybe 60% of the national wealth. Okay, you got 6 people owning, look it up to get the right figures, but I'm in the ballpark.
What role does Penny Walton in California have in the California school system?
Penny Walton, I don't know that much about. I think she's married. Is she married to one of the Walton siblings? And I know.
Education,
Yeah. I've seen her name pop up a lot, and she's just their faction in California. So
you don't think that these people have the public education interest in mind?
No, if they do, I think what they need to do is have a conference with people like me who have experienced. I sent my kids to these schools. Oakland Public Schools. Look up OUSD and find out what Oakland Public Schools are about. It was a hard road in some ways, and because we had been taken over by the state and had a series of 3 superintendents that had been they were state administrators that had been trained by the Eli Broad's unaccredited training program for superintendents, and forget what you were getting.
It's not helping education.
No, it's not helping. They need to come talk to me. They need to talk to any parent. They need to talk to teachers. They need to talk to anybody who actually knows anything about what's going on in these schools and what these kids need. These kids, a lot of the kids in these schools are from settings in their home life that are dramatically difficult in terms of their education, and we need to be helping those kids and getting those things addressed, and stop blaming teachers. Stop blaming teachers. I'm not a teacher, I'm a parent. And we haven't always had wonderful teachers, but I'd say, the teachers we've had have been, pretty good. And my kids have gone on. They're both, one's at UCLA and PhD graduate school for chemistry, and the other one's in New York City going to school in architecture. And, they did fine with Oakland Public Schools. And the bashing that's going on for public schools and teachers has just really got to stop.
My name is Rick Ayers. I am a high school teacher, but I work now at the University of San Francisco in teacher education. So we're here at American Educational Research Association annual meeting. There are 18,000 people here, but we're supposed to be researchers and looking at evidence for what works in schools. But it's also an organization that really likes to cozy up to power, and they thought it would be just fabulous to invite Arnie Duncan here, which I think he should be here. We should be talking to him, but they also want to honor him and give him an award. But he has been a really terrible Secretary of Education. We actually expected better, naively, but he has proved to be a willing handmaiden of the big corporations and the wealthy foundations.
Okay, and so what do you think, why is he doing what he's doing? Because it's profit, to get profit for a person, or what? He says it's the ideology of race to the top, you have to go to the lottery to get a good education.
Well, basically, he and Obama are carrying out the project known as neoliberalism, and they basically believe that everything should be set up to competition, and everything should be a matter of the market deciding. And so if it's all competition, it's student against student, it's teacher against teacher, it's school against school and state against state. So even, the idea that the Department of Education, which should be funding education for all children, have set themselves up like a grant-making foundation. So states have to apply for money and only get it if they receive the grant. So some states don't get it. That's not really public education. So the whole narrative of competition and of sort of a social Darwinist dog-eat-dog world suffuses our schools. It runs everywhere. And even a third grader understands, I may be a rich American with a BMW, or I may be homeless on the street. And I'm in this competition. I have to beat down everybody else. We don't really believe that that's a way to good education. The other thing that's driving this so-called reform is it's a desire by the CEOs and the big corporations to establish a passive working class to fill slots in the economy that they are running. We believe that people need to, that young people need to be given creativity and critical thinking, so they can imagine the kind of future they want to live in and build that future. You don't know what's going to be happening. So you don't know what's going to be happening in 20 years. And hopefully, if our young people take charge, there will be something very humane and a kind of equitable economy that will be much less warlike. I mean, the reason we have schools that are starving is because we have half the budget of this country goes to the military. More money is being spent on prisons now than on prison construction than on school construction. So it's ridiculous. We're protesting because we think Arnie Duncan has betrayed the teachers, betrayed the children. He's all about breaking up the unions. But let's remember, the schools, there wasn't a good old days. The schools weren't wonderful 20 years ago. Black and brown children were being destroyed in these schools before, and these schools were broken. So what we're talking about is how to move towards a real reform where the community establishes standards and the community controls the schools.
My name's Todd Price. I'm a Chicago professor working with National Louis University. Of course, Secretary Duncan comes from Chicago. Let me tell you one story real quick about Secretary Duncan. He was pitching Race to the Top in Ohio several years ago, and he was called out because he wasn't working strongly for school funding reform by Governor Ted Strickland, then Governor Ted Strickland. The problem with Race to the Top and the problem with the information that he's bringing to this conference, it's all about the standardization and the audit culture, do more with less, and it implies a lot of corporate involvement in terms of defining the assessment, making the tests, and then making the assessments of the tests to drive the instruction that the kids get, which is substandard. So the problem with Duncan, and I think the problem with this conference, AERA, is that they are suggesting collusion with that agenda, and everything we've seen so far is that it's been a failure.
How has it been a failure in Chicago?
In Chicago, it basically is used as justification for closing down all the schools and that they're underutilized or underperforming. But what we're seeing increasingly is that many of the schools are just holding their own under very austere conditions. Chicago, of course, has many problems, social problems beyond just the testing and the kids, but the agenda is what I think disturbs folks. In my state of Wisconsin, race to the top meant that you had to allow any number of charter schools to be accredited and to be able to be grown. And so Race to the Top, which is, that's the signature program that Duncan has been carrying with him, has demanded reforms that are not working. The charterization of the schools is not working. It's not showing demonstrable improvement compared to average public schools. The pay for performance, that's what is a signature program here as well. That's not showing any improvement in the schools. What we really need is a Secretary of Education and a conference of American Education Research Association, which is going to go forward and put those forms and those research efforts that are needed. And those efforts we know involve class size, reducing that, co-teaching, and it revolves around collaborative, evidence-based research, of which a lot of this reform rhetoric has very little evidence. In fact, the evidence that's in is that it's failing.
Well, the big corporations, the Gates Foundation, Pearson Company, there are a lot of people who are making money. Michael Milken. Do you think these are the people that are really running the agenda of charters and privatization and testing in education in the United States and internationally?
I would actually say that while that's their agenda, I think that the federal government is as interested in that agenda. It's almost as if you don't know what is the state and what is the corporation anymore, because a lot of great ideas have bubbled up, and you're going to hear from several folks who have had great ideas that have either been not implemented faithfully or been co-opted, or some that have just been disregarded. I think that it's anybody's guess as to what the Obama administration ultimately wants. They say they want to do all of this education reform for social justice, and then you look at what they do, and it seems like they're only interested in a narrow global competitiveness. So who they're getting their marching orders from, that's for them to determine or decide. But there does seem to be a lot of collusion with Pearson. Pearson always earning should be the basic mantra here.
And the shutdown of schools in Chicago, why don't you talk about that? Has that led to further resegregation in the schools and the ideology of you have to be in a lottery to get a good public education, this race to the top ideology?
Well, I think the economy has had a lot to do with the resegregation of Chicago, the gentrification and pushing people out of their neighborhoods and putting up high rises that people can't afford to get into. That's been the main focus of the resegregation. But the charterization surely plays a role in that, and that seems to be the school reform effort behind the closing of the schools, is to close the schools but then move the folks in the schools to another charter if they can get in or elsewhere. So I think there's several factors, not just the school closings.
Well, you have the national AFT, American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, who comes from a charter school, the Green Dot. She has said today that she's reconsidering the testing system. The National Education Association have accepted charters. They say they're good charters. Why have the education unions in the United States not really educated their membership about the potential dangers of charters and privatization?
I think that the leadership has been of that mind. I think the membership has always been suspect of charter schools, frankly. I think they've been suspect of a lot of the initiatives that have seemingly dismissed the knowledge and the value of teachers and teacher unions. I think the leadership, if you're talking about the head of the NEA and the head of the AFT, are getting a little anxious because they see that the results of just strict accountability programs are not showing demonstrable reform. That's in evidence. I mean, I can cite you the Credo studies, other studies that are showing in Tennessee right now that the value-added models are coming up short. So I think that they're a little anxious right now that they've been in partnership with ideas that just don't seem to be proving to be helpful at all. That's why they're backing down now, not because of anything else.
You think they should be accepting money from the Gates Foundation and the Broad Foundation for so-called reform programs around the country?
I don't think so. I mean, because it's one thing to accept philanthropic money, but it's another if you have to accept that money with a condition to do X, Y, and Z. That's the problem, is that the foundational and the philanthropic has changed quite a bit. It's with strings attached, and it's the federal federal government that is also acting in the same manner. They say, oh, well, we'll give you this money from Race to the Top, but then you have to do all of these other things that may or may not have anything to do with, you know, what's best for your own kids. So if it's with strings attached, no, I don't think they should accept the money.
Well, tomorrow is May Day, and May Day 2013, it seems like in the United States the teachers are under attack. Teachers are being blamed for the education problems. I mean, there seems to be a major scapegoating of teachers who teach our children in the United States. What's going on with scapegoating teachers in this country?
Well, I think it's part and parcel, which is the teachers' unions represent a third of the unionized workforce, so that alone, whether they're teachers or not, is what's under attack. It's the corporatism at large which is guiding a lot of this attack. It has very little to do with education. But teachers have been maligned for about 30 years, and I think it's just because it's a convenient straw man. I think if you really looked at the problems in this country, it's the malfeasance and the corruption, and it's the banks making off with a lot of bad debt, and then when that debt went really south and it was pushed back on the rest of the economy, it's easy to distract. That's the real problem, the corruption and malfeasance. So if you blame teachers, that's easy to say, has nothing to do with the reality.
And the bullying of teachers and students in education, is there an epidemic of bullying in the United States in education?
I'd say the epidemic in bullying is a federal government that is saying my way or the highway. I would say that the bullying is where you have people that are really trying to make ends meet in a middle-class job being subjected to increasing audits and having to toe the line to put food on the table. That's a form of bullying that doesn't get talked about very much. But also the foreign policy that we have in this government going far afield from what we're just talking about looks like bullying to me. So I think that we need to open up that discussion about what bullying really looks like and what's happening.
Well, it seems like in capitalism now, in testing and healthcare, more and more testing is involved for nurses, and in education, more and more testing. It's all about, commodification of education, commodification of healthcare. Is that what's really driving this system?
I like the idea of commodification, using that language, because what's suggested is education is just a product and the teachers are workers. And of course we know teachers are much more than workers. So unfortunately I think that is a major part of it, not the only part. Education is being treated as an industry, and that is why the corporations are interested in maximizing the profit on it. That's pretty clear.
Hello, my name is Dr. Michelle Marr. I'm a postdoctoral intern at Oregon Research Institute, and I'm here today because the corporatization or the privatization of lots of our social institutions has proved to be very damaging for our society. As prisons become private, all of a sudden we have more people in prison than in any other industrialized nation. As our medical establishment has become privatized, we have pharmaceutical industries that are taking over a doctor's right to prescribe and to do good medicine. And as corporations are taking over education, we have all this focus on testing that's no longer educating the whole child. And I think that kids are suffering. And I think that there's a lot that's going on with kids and parents that tests in schools that tests do not describe.
So who's behind Arnie, Duncan, and President Obama in pushing this testing in charter schools in the United States?
It seems to me, from my perspective, that those that are profiting from that are behind it. All we have to do is follow the money trail. And the money trail is not going to public schools. It is not the public that is paying their school taxes that's going to schools. We see schools that are increasingly cut. And I'm interested in there being a national strike. I'm interested in everyday kids getting great educations where they learn how to relate to one another in a good way and accept each other, where they learn to cooperate, where there's a whole bunch of things that tests don't test.
Well, in other countries, Mexico, Europe, there are national campaigns against privatization. Why is it the case in the United States there's no national campaign against privatization of education?
I think that's a great question. I think that we are campaigning right now. And I think part of it is because when we campaign, we often don't make it on national media.
Well, what about the national unions? The AFT, the NAA have millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. They haven't launched any national campaign against privatization of education.
No comment. I don't know enough about what they're doing. But what I do know is that they're not doing enough. And our own AERA is not doing enough.
And Arnie Duncan's going to be here today. Are you going to be there when he speaks?
I will be there when he speaks.
Are you going to be doing anything when he speaks?
What? Well, I'm going to be there for my students and for my children's children to protest this, because I want them to know that at least that we're doing something.
And where do you teach? Where do you live?
I live in Eugene, Oregon.
And what's going on up there? Is there a problem with privatization in Eugene, Oregon?
We are feeling the effects of major statewide and national cuts in such a way that our class sizes are increasingly enormous. Teachers are struggling. And then they're expected to have their students do really well in this, do increasingly well with less and with less and with less. I am supporting reinstituting the funding for public education at 1970 levels with correcting for inflation.
What? People, not profits. What? People, not profits. What? People, not profits.
Go inside. Those of you who are wearing badges. And want to go inside and protest the talk. You should get ready to go ahead and do that. And look for safe seats in the front row. We want to maintain a presence outside. So some of you should stay and continue the chants and the protest.
People,